Hey Zeku, hey Karo. How we all doing? We got some good questions today, so I'm looking through my books if I have some resources at the moment. I'll be right there though. Alright, let's get the show on the road. Hey, there we are. Oh man. The sun is so bright. How is everyone doing today? New setup? No, it's not a new setup. I've been using this for like a couple of weeks, but yeah. Face is a little bit blown out. The only thing that I can do is really close out curtains or something like that. We'll have to deal with it. Oh, thanks, man. Looks nice. Yeah, I'm kind of happy with the setup right now. Because before I had like a big tripod on my desk and it was taking up so much space. It was kind of ridiculous. And now I just have what do they call it? Like one of those Elgato mounts. It's literally just like a steel tube where you can attach things onto. Like the camera mount, which is pretty cool. Hey, da habe ich two. How's it going? Alright, I'll be right back. I'm gonna close the curtains here. There we go. Oh, it's a bit too dark. Let's do something like this. Whoop. There we go. Hey. That's better. Going good. Already making progress on the cushioning of the chair we talked about yesterday. That's awesome. How about you? Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I was reading through the questions before the stream, and we have a lot of interesting questions this week. There's gonna be some difficult ones in this one. There's like a couple of anonymous questions that are gonna be interesting to go through. But yeah, other than that, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I was just reading through the questions, and I'm probably gonna do some more personal work in the afternoon. I've been having a lot of fun with updating the textures for my scene. But yeah, it's the end of the month, so we'll see how much time I get, right? Because the end of the month is always quite hectic when it comes to just Beyondextent stuff in general. Because let me give you like an update on like what's happening within Beyondextent, right? Like first of all, we have the team challenges like rounding off. Like the deadline is on the 1st of May, so all the teams are basically in the last stretch, in the last week getting their stuff done. And yeah, it's looking amazing. I can always peek into like the different channels, right? But yeah, it's gonna be interesting how it's all gonna come together. Other than that, we also have Ioana taking up the reins for doing the solo challenges too. So she's gonna be kicking off her first solo challenge, which is gonna be exciting as well. And I'm thinking about even taking part in this one. I'm interested in it myself too. No spoilers though, but I'll leave that up to Ioana. But I'm interested. Other than that, what's happening? Obviously, the update to like the monthly PDF that's coming. I'm doing like a bunch of tips and tricks on trim sheets at the moment. Like the first one got released last week, which was about planning. And I'm probably gonna do like all the stages of like a trim sheet and how to basically start it from scratch and like build your own trim sheet. Because that's something that a lot of people have been requesting. And there is one more thing that I still need to prepare like a bunch of stuff for. But I'm gonna keep that a surprise. But it is coming soon. Like it's gonna be announced pretty soon. So it's gonna be a crazy end of this month. Like it's gonna be a whole lot of stuff happening all at once. So I'm excited. I'm interested. I'm thinking that it could be good to just do these like every week, just give like a little short update on what's happening behind the scenes. I think that could be interesting. But yeah, that was like basically behind the scenes of Beyondextent. Oh, let me do like the hydrate, Cairo. Thanks, man. I prepared. Depending on how many people are gonna hydrate today, I might have to do a refill. But yeah, like lots of amazing stuff happening. Lots of interesting things kicking off. And I feel good about it. I'm excited. So let's have a look-see. All right. Should we just dive straight into the first question then? Let's have a look. Let me open a Notion here. All right. So, first question of today is from Dylan Burgess. He asked, like, this may be something that varies from studio to studio, but what effect does your position on the artist hierarchy, junior to senior to lead, have on how much information you get on the project you're working on? Are artists generally given only the minimal amount of information that is required for them to do their part of the job? Thank you so much for the question, Dylan. It's an interesting one, right? I think it does sort of depend on the studios, but I don't think there's that big of a difference between studios, honestly. In general, I think as like a frontline worker, as like an environment artist, especially juniors and mids, right, or like experienced, you are only concerned about like the direct implementation of stuff. Like you're not worried about like the big picture. You're just worried about like getting your stuff in and getting it working. While getting it working, getting it looking good, like discussing it with LDs. Usually, well, if we talk about the open world aspect, right? Like usually you get paired up with an LD to work on locations together, so that you know that you have to sync up with them whenever there's like questions, or whenever they do an update or have like new suggestions. So that's usually how, yeah, when it comes to the amount of information that you get, it's usually just like, look, this is the location, this is a story that's happening here, this is sort of the feeling that we want to create, that sort of stuff, like the really hands-on stuff. It's not about like project structure or like project related stuff. So the higher you go up to like a senior, you get a bit more involved with just conversations with other seniors or with leads that have a bigger impact on like bigger portions of the project, right? So that is definitely true. There's definitely like a difference in the information that you get. Because to be honest, if you think about it, if you're a junior getting into the industry and it's like year 2, like you also don't really care about like what's happening in like a different section that you're never going to be working on anyway. Like you don't really care. Or like, let's say for example, if we look at Far Cry 5, I didn't work on Far Cry 5, right? So just to make sure that that is out of the way. But like I can imagine that if you're an environment artist working on one of the regions, so like say you're working on Jacob's region, you don't really care about what's happening in Fate's region. Even though like it has an impact on the world itself, right? Because there might be like overlapping elements. But you don't really care about what's happening in the other region. Whereas as a senior and going up from that, you are more and more involved with like the overarching conversation of, hey, what if we, I think they had convoys going through like the different regions. So how do the convoys change? Do they change at all? Like those conversations will be happening from like, I guess from like senior to lead, and how that impacts the environments. Because I assume there must have been like a lot of conversations happening about, at some point, right? Where they, if we talk about the convoys, like maybe it would be cool to have like a unique convoy that impacts the environment art, right? Those conversations probably happen at some point. Because it's a slight tangent from the question, but that is also what happens with developing games, right? You have, there's so many conversations that happen in the background, or like when it comes to design and how we can evolve the world and how it works with storytelling and all these cool ideas. But I would say only like 5% of them gets used, right? So yeah, there is definitely like a difference in the information that you get as a junior or a mid compared to like a senior or a lead. Obviously as a lead, you're more involved in like bridging the gap between like multiple teams and all that stuff too. Yeah, it's not something that you have to worry about at all. Like it's just the more experience that you build up, the more experience or like exposure you're gonna get to that other to those other chunks of information. Hey Talissa. Hey, I hope you're doing good. Yeah, I'm doing good. Thank you. How are you doing? And welcome to the chat. I've got a question for you. How do you keep yourself motivated? That's a really good question. We're gonna go through the community questions first, and then I'm gonna go through the chat and read all the chat questions. So we're definitely gonna get back to that question because it's a good one. But I want to get through like the community questions first. So next question is from Anonymous. We have like a lot of anonymous questions today. I think 4 in total, which is quite a lot. So this question is, even though you're an environment artist, do you still care about what the community thinks of the games you have or are currently working on by going through online forums, watching YouTube videos, and reading the comments? Yeah, for sure. I mean, in my opinion, that is the most important thing you can do, right? Even with the little information that you get, there's so much that you can get out of it by just reading the reactions from people or just watching people react to like trailers dropping or something, right? So yeah, for sure. Especially when I think back at like the Planet Coaster days, or I would say generally the Frontier days when I worked at Frontier Developments. Because they were really tight with the community. They had like a good relationship with their community. So that helped us like actively look for stuff that we could create in the future. Because people, I don't know, people were talking about like some stuff that would be cool to have in the game, and then we would try to incorporate that into like next DLCs. Obviously, as much as possible, right? Like there's obviously limitations to that. And the other part of it is like it's just nice to be working on a game that is under wraps for like a year or two, like multiple years, and then finally see the first thing that comes out and seeing the excitement that people have with it. It's just really, really nice to get that boost as well, and just to see all the people being really excited about it. I would say right now it's more YouTube videos, right? From like the limited information that's out there. But because the development structure is a bit different, right? Like if I think back to, again, the Frontier days, they had like alphas and betas and all that stuff, and you could see it evolving on the forums live, which was pretty cool. And then also the workshop that they had in Planet Coaster, we could literally just go to the workshop and see what people were building with our pieces, and that is freaking awesome. So imagine that you're the designer for some of the Lego pieces. There's always a disconnect because you can't really see what people are building, or you can't interact with it like you wanted to, right? But we could. Like, we would literally build modular pieces. We would send them out in a package, and then the next week we would just look at stuff that was built with them, and you could drag them into your own game, which is pretty freaking cool. Just that interaction between developers and the players was awesome. So that's a really good question, Anonymous. There's obviously one thing that comes with it. It can also work the opposite way. So just try to stay away from all the negativity. Like with a with a market of millions of players, you're always gonna get negativity. Like it's not ever gonna happen. So don't get dragged down by the negativity and just focus on the positive side. Especially as a dev working on it, right? It can, if it's constructive negativity, then you can get something out of it. But usually, people just like to bitch and moan online as well. I mean, that's honestly just a part of it too. But from my experiences, I would say so much of it was just super positive and like crazy creations of people and like excitement about the stuff that we're working on, that it kind of drowned out like all the negativity that was going around. So good question. That's actually a question that I want to ask like other people too now that I think of it, because it's not something that I think I've ever discussed with other devs. That's interesting. All right. Next one is from Cairo. Thanks a lot for the question, buddy. So from a hiring point of view, what do you think of fan art in a portfolio? I find myself more inspired by games than just concept art because I can take apart how things are made if I look around. Thoughts on that? From a hiring point of view, what do I think about fan art? From a hiring point of view, I don't think there's a difference, right? Because it's still about like the foundations of it, like the technical execution, like artistic insight. it gets to a point where if you just copy and paste something that already exists in the game, it's way easier than taking the structure that's there, or like the universe that's there. I'm thinking about like Last of Us, right? Like, even though I never played the games, it has such a distinct style. Or like, you get this idea of, if you want to do a fan art for The Last of Us, you have this image in your head already. But that doesn't mean that you should just straight copy from the game, right? Because then it's kind of like, oh, okay, like they just copied like an environment, or like a section of the environment, into their own portfolio. Whereas it shows way more of a thought process of like deconstructing the universe that they built and then rebuilding it into your own style, or like in your own way, if you take apart the core elements of that game and then build something that is uniquely you but still fits within that universe. That, if we compare those two things, if you just have like a straight copy from the game, or if you have something that works within that universe but is still uniquely you, that is obviously gonna get like the big points, right? So I would personally say that's where a lot of the conversations come from, with like, should you do fan art or shouldn't you do it? I think it's more about a question of like copying what's already there, because you can look at any universe, like any game, there's still like enough room to have your own interpretation that still fits within that universe. And I think that's always going to be more impressive than just like a straight copy paste. But you also brought this point up, right? You find yourself more inspired by the games than just the concept art, because I can take apart how things are made if I look around. That is an important thing, because you need to do that anyway. Like, even if you look at the concept art, or even if you look at the art books, or wherever you get your initial spark of inspiration from, right? You need to kind of reverse engineer where they came from, and then look at those initial inspirations, and then try to see which decisions they made to come to the conclusion of like, okay, this is what we want to end up with. So let's say, for example, I'm thinking about the Metro series, which no, not the Metro series. What's that game called? Stalker. So if you look at Stalker, for example, like a lot of the Stalker games is actually inspired by really old Russian movies that were really slow, and they played with the concept of time and like how there was like this influence, this outside influence from like weird forces that were happening, right? So that is one example that I brought up with people that were doing like Stalker inspired scenes. Like, look at where it comes from. I'm gonna butcher the name, but I think it was like no, I'm not even gonna say it. I'm not sure about that. But you can watch them on YouTube. Like, if you look at, if you can probably find it if you look at like Stalker movie or something like that. You can look at the original inspiration, where the thought of that game comes from, and then kind of see if you can find your own unique adaptation of it that still fits within that universe. I think that's the most important thing. Just like being able to deconstruct it and not just straight copy it. It's kind of the same way that I think about tutorials. It's like, you can do a tutorial like 1-to-1 and it can still look good, but you come into an interview and and I've had this before, I'm gonna be like, okay, that's from a tutorial. And that's cool. But what did you do with that information that you got from that tutorial? Like, how did you apply it to like your next project? Because that's the most important thing. like taking those lessons and turning it into something where you apply those lessons on your own work. That's the thing that I want to see. I don't want to see it like a straight copy. So yeah, there's obviously like a lot of interesting things happening with just like fan art. There have been some pretty weird examples of people like tacking on fan art, but like really small, so they can kind of benefit from the franchise that they're making fan art for, right? Because people, it's kind of like art clickbait. They think that they're gonna click on a game and like some cool art from that game, but then it's actually a fan art for that game. So I would try to stay away from that. Hey, Angelo Steve. Finally managed to catch a stream live. Hell yeah. Welcome to the chat. So yeah. I mean, if anyone else has like opinions on it, feel free to just share it in the chat too. Because I love discussing all of this. The question was basically, what do you think of fan art in a portfolio, if you really want to condense it down? Because there's so many different elements to it, right? I do think that the core of it is just being able to make your own thing out of it. I think that's sort of the core of that question. And don't be, I don't know, don't be scummy or clickbaity when you're just creating the thumbnails or anything like that. Copying does take some level of skill. Yes, exactly. That's also the thing. Like, to make it look as good. No, I think you're right. But I want to see if you took all the lessons from, like, copying from that tutorial, right? Because, let's say, from a recruiter standpoint, or like from an interview standpoint, right? If you have a portfolio that's filled with just tutorials that you followed, I'm just gonna be like, okay, you can do tutorials, but where is your own artistic input? Where is your artistic voice? From like an environment art perspective, right? That's what I want to see. I want to see you think about like, okay, I followed this, I don't know, like I followed this tutorial by Daniel Tiger for like creating good materials. So I have that on my portfolio, but then I took those lessons and used that in like an open world example, or like a small open world diorama or something. Oh, okay. I mean more in terms of like copying from a game scene. Yeah. But then if you're going through all the trouble anyway, why don't you just create your own scene? That is, it can still be based on that. Because then, in my opinion, like all the fun part of being an environment artist is being able to construct your own worlds. But then you're kind of foregoing that by just recreating stuff. Because it does, like you said, it does take some skill to like recreate a scene. But you can quite easily create something that is uniquely your own, right? Even in your case, like look at the stuff that you're doing. You're clearly inspired by, I mean, this is kind of a weird example because we can't really see the work, right? But I know your work and it's definitely influenced by Ghost of Tsushima, but it is still your own thing, right? It is not just like a straight copy. So it's already showing like creative insight and like how you think about like the world and what stories you want to tell, instead of just like ripping it straight out from the game. If that makes sense. One subtle way to appeal to a studio is small Easter eggs in their games, in your scenes. Probably won't work 100% of the times, but I feel like it would make like a nice impression. Yeah, that's a good point. I can definitely see that working because it shows interest in the games, right? Especially if it's a more obscure Easter egg. Would seem to be the same thing to me as working from a main concept. Yeah, I mean, even with concepts, right? There is still like a creative process that happens when you translate a concept art into like a 3D thing. Because like the concept is not the finished thing, right? Like the concept usually is what the concept artists propose to the art direction. And they're like, yes, this is what we want. But you still need to be able to recreate it in 3D. And then as a 3D artist, you're usually still like putting your own creative input. So you're still working within those barriers that have been set by the concept and art direction. But with communication, this is obviously working within a team, right? Like with communication between you and a concept artist, you can push it further than the original thing. Because usually what that means as working from a concept is not just like a straight copy. You're still having your input and you're still saying like, look, these dimensions don't work for the level design. Maybe we can do something like this and make it awesome looking. I know this is kind of generic, the stuff that I'm talking about, but I just want to say that there's still like a creative thinking behind it, instead of like just straight copying it from like a game scene or a tutorial or whatever. I hope that makes sense. Hey Ben, how's it going, buddy? Also Samut, hey. I didn't say hi. I'm sorry about that. But you're right though. Like if we go to like the thing that you mentioned, Cairo, like it does take skill to just copy it. But yeah, I mean, this is mostly my opinion, right? Like if you're going through the trouble of copying it anyway, why don't you put your own spin on it? And just make it uniquely yours instead of like a recreation. Yeah, no worries, man. Thanks for the good question too. Oh, for sure, there's always creativity on your end, but not as much as creating your own world. That is true. The same way using a game scene as a main concept is less creative than making your own. Yeah. Same way using a game scene as a main concept is less creative than making your own. Yeah, that's true. That is true, because you're starting from like a base, right? That is definitely true. But yeah, also on the other end, like for a lot of people, starting from scratch is just way too intimidating too. Especially because we're mostly talking about like people that want to get into the industry, right? If we're talking about kind of fan art to get on your portfolio. Because I'm making the assumption that you're doing this to get into that particular studio then. And it might be overwhelming if you have to start from scratch. But that is very true though. Yeah, like... Yeah, it basically comes down to like the being of the opinion that if you're going through all the hassle, you might as well make it your own. But that is a good question. This is like a really good question from Anonymous that I want to have other people pitch into. Because this is something that everyone can answer, I think. So we got a question from Anonymous. What are some of the things you wished would improve with the games industry? This is a very good question. Yeah. man, what to pick? The thing that I'm currently thinking about first is I would want to say like more supportive leadership. And this is not just specifically about like the studios that I worked in, right? I'm looking at like the entire game industry, where we still have this issue that we have like a lot of ego on like the top ranks. Not all companies have it, but that definitely seems to be like a big talking point still. Because I think that will relieve like a lot of the issues that we have now. And I think, as you pointed out, Cairo, I think crunch might also be something there, where if you were to listen to people that are working in the trenches, right? Like I'm just saying this as like a hypothetical situation. You're an art director and you do like a checkup with like a junior environment artist, right? Which it's not that common. Normally you get it through the hierarchy. But let's say like, hey, let's just have a one-on-one. Let's just have a talk. Like, let's see how you feel about stuff. You might get some really valuable information out of that discussion. If the junior environment artist is really open to talk to, right? And is not intimidated by talking to an art director. Because, yeah, I think like a lot of the power dynamics that are they're going away. So don't get me wrong, it's not like a thing that is still as prevalent as in, well, like the 2000s or whatever, right? From what I've heard. But yeah, I would love to see that as like a dev working inside of the games industry. This is obviously, I have to say this with a caveat, these are all my personal opinions. But yeah, I think you're right, Cairo. I think crunch is the first thing that comes to mind. But it's kind of weird because most of that is coming from the US. And then all the backlash is coming from the US, right? I'm not saying that it doesn't happen in Europe. There have definitely been horror stories about CD Projekt, and I think 4A Games had like crunch as well at some point, or like just like really big wage gaps. But I would say, in general, we're going in like an upwards trajectory, and I think crunch is definitely vilified by a lot of the studios. For example, like I can be open about this too. Like I've never had to work overtime, and if I had to, or if I wanted to, I could do it, because I've done. Now I'm talking about within Ubisoft Berlin, right? So this is getting really specific. I've done maybe once or twice overtime, and that was because as a team we decided to do so. So it was not like mandated from above. It was not something that we had to do. It was something that, as a team, we made a decision to just do it, because we felt really connected to the stuff that we were doing, and we were just like, look, we have this milestone coming up. Let's just push it as far as we can. Let's just put like a little bit more time in as a team, instead of just like a single person doing it. But yeah, usually you only see one side of the spectrum, right? Because there's this negativity bias too. But I think there's also lots of devs that have like good working cultures and don't do crunch and all that stuff. But obviously, it makes sense that we don't talk about that, right? But in general, I like the way that we're going. I like the conversations that are happening, and also how outspoken some companies are in it, and how if they speak up about it, like I'm thinking CD Projekt Red, like they took a stance against crunch and then they went back into crunch, and I think people will remember that, especially devs, right? Maybe the people that buy the games don't really remember that, but I think as a culture inside of the games industry, you have to be careful of what you do with that, because you're gonna create this atmosphere of like, oh, I would love to work on like Cyberpunk, but if you start thinking about it from like a personal, like a mental health perspective, it's like, nah, I don't want to. I don't want to risk like losing my family, or like working too many hours so that I have to sleep on the job or something like that, right? So industry could benefit from more transparency and open discussion. I think so too. I agree. Yeah, this sort of goes hand in hand with how secretive we have to be about like game systems and all that stuff, right? So there needs to be a limit on that too, I think. Because obviously, I mean, shareholders and all that stuff. But like if we just have like a more open discussion about, I mean, this can also be, the first thing that I think of is like more open discussions about wages, right? There's still, and I feel it too, there's still like a lot of pushback on that idea, including myself. Like I'm not gonna name a number, for example, right? So there's still like a lot of hesitation that comes into it. But yeah, I agree. And some studios are really doing a good job on that. Like Frontier, I think, needs to be applauded for that. Like the transparency that they have with their game, like how open they communicate with their community, I think is really noteworthy. And I think obviously there's a lot of companies that do that. I'm naming Frontier because, I mean, that's the company that I worked for, so I've seen it on the floor, right? I've got personal experience with it. Thanks for the hydrate, someone. Appreciate it. Let's have a look. Game-wise, I wish studios stopped going in that bigger and longer direction. I'd love smaller scope games with more focused experiences, instead of so many enormous open world games that usually can't excel at any aspect, but only be eyed everywhere due to their size. Yeah. I think what is happening with open world games, and this is my personal opinion again, right, is that we wanted to go bigger and bigger, but the technology wasn't there to support them yet. So I feel like we're getting to a point where the technology is like slowly but surely like catching up with that, and we're able to make more impactful open worlds. And I think a lot of studios are realizing that's what the people want too, right? There have been so many games, like even though I love them, like they are just too long for their own good, or they are too open and they have too much bullshit going on in like the open world aspects of it, right? Where you just feel like, oh, they just scattered like a bunch of repeating quests here because they needed to fill up this big world. There have been like really interesting discussions about that, where the discussion of fast travel and if you should have fast travel and all that stuff. Like, I really like the direction that what's the game? Metro Exodus was going into, because technically that was an open world game, but you would move from like hub to hub, so you had like smaller open worlds, which made them like really impactful. There was also no like fast traveling, there was no shortcuts, because you had to familiarize yourself with the world. And I think honestly that could be a good formula that I personally want to see more of. Yeah, even if we cut out, there must be some examples of games where we cut out fast traveling and we have more condensed and more rich but smaller open world games. I think that could be really interesting as well. Imagine if AAA studios put the time and budget to do games as unique as indies do. It's not gonna work though, because they have to be accountable to shareholders. And if they see that they're gonna get distracted by these smaller games and just sinking budget into games that might not even be profitable, I think that's the biggest thing, right? It's they got into this accountability loop where they need to make sure that if they push something out, people would want to buy it. And the more unique you go, the bigger the risk you take. Big creative risks, but I would still love to see more variation and uniqueness. Yeah, I do too. And I think this is what I've been saying for a while now. But I would love to see... Well, now that I'm thinking of it, like if we look at what well, again, Ubisoft did with Watch Dogs Legion, that was technically a risk, right? Like the whole procedural like conversation system and like having procedural people and like giving them all like a job, that was a big creative risk, if we're honest about it. And I think it really set like a template for doing something AI driven in the future. So yeah, I don't think AAA studios are ever gonna get to the agility level that smaller studios have. I think that's a big issue, because it takes a lot of time to just get stuff going in bigger studios, whereas in a smaller studio you can just it's easier to switch it up, right? It's easier to make changes that don't impact like literally thousands of people. So yeah, I mean, I do agree with the sentiment though. I would love to see like more focused experiences. Just go indie. I think honestly that's even a good point, right? Even though it's like kind of a jokey opinion, but if that is the thing that you're missing in your life, maybe you need to go indie. Because this is the thing that's interesting, right? Because AAA is so focused on creating these blockbuster like big experiences that sell millions and millions. It leaves this gap for indies to just thrive. Whereas maybe if they were to, let's say, I don't know, let's say in a weird example where we have half of Ubisoft is making AAA game and then half of Ubisoft is making these really kick-ass indie games, there might not be a void big enough for like indie games to thrive, right? And let's say that those indie games by Ubisoft were then like really good, up to like some of the things you expect, right? Like Outer Wilds and Risk of Rain and all that stuff. Yeah, exactly. That was the thing that I meant too. Like solo indie dev, I would never do. But yeah, that's the thing, right? I think there was like research done like a couple of years ago to kind of determine what the ideal production size is, and they sort of estimated that a team of 70 people is ideal. The ideal balance between like creative output and just how much you can do from like a production standpoint. So yeah, exactly. We're on the same page. But yeah, I mean, we're almost talking alt history, right? If I'm talking about like what if Ubisoft had like a big market share in indie, and if there wasn't that big of a space for indie to really thrive. Let's see. Insomniac set some devs aside and made Song of the Sea. Great indie gem with great production qualities due to the experience of the devs. I'm curious, did they set those devs aside, or did those devs make the decision to just make a game on their own time? Because that's the thing that happens a lot, I think. You just have like devs, I don't know, maybe just going through like this cycle of, man, this is kind of getting stale, this is kind of getting boring, I'm not challenged enough. And then they sort of build this prototype on their own, and then they just fully develop their time into that. But I have no idea how, like, Insomniac. Yeah, I don't know any more details either. It would be interesting to look into. Because it might still be, right? I'm gonna be a bit cynical here, so bear with me for a second. Because usually the stuff that you do from a creative perspective is still owned by companies. You sign that away in some like NDA cases. So I don't know. Look, I'm being total cynic here. Maybe there's something that's going on there, right? I don't know. It would be interesting to look into that, because I don't want to be a cynic here, right? So I'll just leave it there, and I'll look. Song of the Deep. Yeah. I know the game you're talking about. I'm gonna look that up. After the stream. Okay. We do have some more questions to get through though. So this was an awesome discussion, guys. I appreciate all the comments. This is some really great input. All right. Let's have a look at the list here. Tropical Moisture. What was the hardest thing for you to learn personally, and how did you overcome that? What about the thing that came easiest? Hardest thing for me to learn. That is a good question. I had a look at this question yesterday. I mean, I don't want to make it seem like there was nothing hard to learn, right? I think it's more a question of like there was so much hard stuff to learn that I have an issue picking anything from that list. I would probably say like communication. Like just communication and like or like presenting for the team, right? That sort of goes into like hand in hand. Like leading a meeting or something like that. That was always like a really big blocker, and that is something that I'm super grateful for, by the way, where this team at Ubisoft Berlin like really gave me the chance to do that, and like really gave me the chance to grow, even as uncomfortable as it was doing like a first presentation for like 200 people or something. Oh, that was probably like the hardest thing for me to learn, and it's literally just learning by doing it. Obviously I had some help from people, and I'm forever grateful for them giving feedback and like helping me through it. But yeah, I think honestly that's probably the hardest thing that I had to do. And I'm by no stretch of the imagination done with learning about that. Like I would say I'm still early within that, because I'm still hesitant to do presentations like for a big audience. So yeah, how did I overcome that? It's just by doing it. The thing that I thought of is this mindset of saying no and then thinking about it later. So I had these moments when people reached out to me and were like, "Hey, do you want to do a presentation about this?" And I'm just like, "Yeah, sure." And before I had like any doubt in my mind, or like if I had the time to really think about it, I would already have said yes, and I had to do it. And then I can obviously stress and worry about that later, but which I did. What about the thing that came easiest? Oh god, the thing that came easiest. Probably moving countries. Like moving to the UK in the beginning, I was so excited and hyped about it that it was pretty easy for me to make that step. As weird as it sounds, like just leaving your family and all your friends behind to move to a new country. Yeah, I would definitely say that that was the easiest thing. I mean, it doesn't mean that there wasn't like a bunch of stress involved, but like from just like how easy it felt to make that step, I was like, yeah, let's go. This is my opportunity. I'm taking it. There was like no second doubt in my mind to like stay in Belgium at that point. So yeah, I appreciate the question. That was a fun one. It's a lot of stuff to think about. Let's have a look here in the chat. So Ben, I'm gonna talk about your question after we get through like 2 more questions, and then I'm gonna go through the chat. I know this is a pretty long session, so thank you all for bearing with me. So let's see about these questions. Another one from Anonymous. Throughout all of your career in the games industry so far, have you ever worked on parts of a game or a game in general which you personally would have disliked as a gamer? For example, a game that was shipped with a lot of obvious bugs, content that was gated behind microtransactions, etc. Honestly, I think I've been pretty fortunate with that. All the stuff that I worked on, I could definitely see myself playing. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there was anything. I would say that there may have been like initial doubts, like with like some proposals of like, look, we're gonna do this. I can't really think about a concrete example. But like the initial idea was like, that doesn't really sound too exciting. But then as you see it coming together and it gets fleshed out, it's like, oh, okay, I can see this. I like where this is going. Because I think that's a big part of the games industry, right? Like the creative process is messy. Like there's no 2 ways about it. Like it is fairly messy. Like it's a lot of iteration, a lot of back and forth between all the involved parties. Like there's a lot going on. But yeah, maybe in 5 years we can look at this question and have like a different answer. So yeah, I think I'm just being fortunate up until this point. I would say that in the beginning when I got into the industry, and this is a story that I have told many times before, I wanted to work on Elite Dangerous. But I got put on Planet Coaster, and I was really bummed out about that. So it's not the same thing that like you were asking, but it's still, I felt like really bummed out that I couldn't get to work on like Elite Dangerous. Because that was the thing that I wanted to work on, or like I wanted to work on it because I played it myself, right? At that point, like Planet Coaster was still in development, but I wasn't really a fan of like the what was it called, like management sims. I was like, nah, I don't really feel working on this. But in hindsight, it was probably the best thing that could have happened, honestly, because it was such a unique project. Like working in sims, there's not that many companies that do it these days. And it's such a wholesome community. It was such a fun team to be working in too. And yeah, I just look at that moment and I'm just really happy that I had that in my life. Even though it sounds so cliche. All right. This is the last question. This is gonna be a hefty one, so bear with me as I'm reading through this because this is quite a lengthy one. I'll do like a summary in the end to just make it easy. So, hello Tim. I'm after some advice, please. We have a producer who has become rather difficult to work with. they are in charge of our environment art team, but they have very little knowledge of environment art or even game dev. They come from a different industry. Personally, they are a great person, generally kind, and mostly well organized, which is what you want in a producer. That's true. But they are calling the shots down to the micromanagement level, even getting upset if we speak to another teammate directly rather than in an official meeting that this producer has set up. Okay. They end up causing a lot of confusion and stress among the team, but I am the only one who's really speaking up about this. Since I am the only one to speak up, I feel like this has painted a target on my back, and they now treat me very differently. They can be very brash when speaking to me. I was very happy in my role, and I still enjoy environment art, but since this has arisen, I've become very burnt out and stressed. I also feel that if I talk to other people at the studio about this, then it will reflect on me badly, and it could even follow me to other companies if I get painted as a person who cannot get along with others. This was a long one, and it's tricky to write without giving examples, but any advice you can give is greatly appreciated. Yeah. I mean, it's a long question, but it's a very interesting one. So let's try to divide this up a little bit, right? So at first we have a situation where we have a producer that is micromanaging everyone in the team and not allowing team members to talk with each other directly. So let's see. Let's discuss that first, and let's see if we can get to if we can help you out in this. First of all, I just want to say, if they're calling the shots down to a micromanagement level, that is not the role of a producer. A producer should be there to support the team and to produce them, right? And to help them figure out like a good workflow that gives the oversight to the producer itself, where they can still look at all the moving parts and make sense of it and put it together. But going down to the micromanagement level might indicate that they're quite insecure about the state, or because you mentioned that they come from like a different industry. It might be insecurity because they come from a different industry and they don't really have the experience to work with in games. So this by itself is a tricky situation, right? Because if I look at it from their perspective, that producer might be looking for answers and might just be trying things that they think might fit best because they don't have anyone to talk to about this. Even though they're getting upset with other people, like getting upset with people that talk with other people in the team, I mean, that is sort of getting onto the border of ridiculous, right? Because then you're not trusting the team to even talk to each other, and that's not what you want to have as a producer. So let's see. And then the second part is you spoke up about this, right? And you feel that it's painted a target on your back, and they now treat you very differently, which to me indicates that there has been conversations happening, but they haven't happened in a way where it's constructive or where it gets appreciated by both parties. And this is creating animosity between both parties, right? And you're destroying the relationship that you have between the two, where it should come from another perspective. Like, as difficult as this sounds, you should be trying to be building up that relationship to a point where you can make suggestions to that person and being like, oh, look, I know that we've been trying to do it in this way, but maybe we can try tweaking this here, and I'll take like full ownership of like this small thing here. For example, we could look at the communication between the team, right? you could propose to them at a certain point when their relationship is better that there is a conversation that needs to happen to like open up communication between the team back up, because that is probably the most important thing. And you need to bring this up with examples that can help them. You need to create this, and I know that this is tricky, right? Because now relationships are at an all-time low. So it's very tricky to get out of this hole at the moment. But you need to try to build that relationship back up and show them that you're on their side and that you want to help them. For example, bring in the team communication back up. Is that if you can establish communication between team members again, that will help them. That will help the producer in this case. Just because there's more communication happening, and if it's all well and good, it's gonna go to Jira or whatever they track, right? And it allows a producer to take a more hands-off approach in this case. But all that being said, I 100% agree. I've never been in this personally, right? So let's get that out of the way first. I've never been in such a difficult situation myself. Because yeah, I can completely understand that you're very burned out and stressed about this. Hey Jason, hey Zeskos, welcome to the chat. Yeah, so the third part of the question is, you want to talk to other people, but then you're worried about it reflecting bad on you. And you are right about that part. I don't think it's going to follow you to other companies. Because if you handle it in a constructive way, then no one's ever going to say like, oh my God, he just started shouting or was like really negative about the whole thing, right? Like if you're actively trying to be like a positive force and trying to build up a relationship with the producer and helping them to be more detached from the whole theme, then that's going to benefit the whole team, right? And no one's ever going to badmouth you for that or like trying to achieve that. Yeah. Because that's a fair concern. But if you can kind of see where this is going, right? Sort of take like ownership of the fact that this is like a broken relationship and try to mend it from your side. And you can call it playing the game or like building relationships or whatever you want to call it, right? You just have to do, well, you got to do what you have to do, right? To make the team spirits better. Because in the end, if this works, if you stuck through it and you kind of find a way to build up a relationship with them, the entire team is going to be fucking ecstatic to have you around. I can tell you that. I know that this is kind of tricky, just as like a monologue, right? So I do want to leave you with some resources. Where I get a lot of my quote unquote leadership training is from listening to a podcast called the Jocko podcast. And he released this series called The Debrief, which is basically because they run a consulting company for like leadership, right? So they deal in like leadership training. And they go through like day-to-day cases where we have conflicts exactly like this, where we have like broken relationships and how to repair them. So I can definitely recommend the Jocko podcast, especially the Debrief podcast. Also, this is a great resource for that too. It's from Jocko Willink, sorry. It's called Extreme Ownership. I highly recommend getting this book. If you're interested in any leadership and how to take like full ownership. He was a former Navy SEAL, so this is coming from like a military perspective. But it is amazing. Just looking at those high stress battlefield situations and how they translate to like how you can translate them to like day-to-day life, right? It's highly recommended reading. And it's probably the thing that gave me like a lot of insight in this. Because for example, if we run into issues, any issue at work, right? It's all about me. Like, how can I help the situation? And the same thing with running Beyondextent. Like, if there are issues, let's say for example, we ran the first team challenge or like the second team challenge, and there were some issues within a certain team. That is not the team's fault. That is my fault as an owner of Beyondextent to then put in place a structure that makes it work better for the next time. And just adopting that mindset will help you resolve some of these issues. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, because it's not, but it will definitely help. So I really hope that this helped. I'll read through it again really quickly. Because, yeah, at the end of the day, this is like a bad relationship, right? And you need to build up that relationship with your producer to then together go in like a new direction where you can open up communication within the team, where you open up open up communication within the team, help the team out, and get rid of this micromanagement level. So I really appreciate question, Anonymous, and I hope that this helped. And I know that a lot of these questions are really personal, but always feel free to reach out to me in like a DM on Discord, and just feel free to discuss it. Yeah, I hope it helped, and good luck. Okay, so that is all for the community questions. An hour and 15 minutes. It's quite a long one. We had a ton of good questions, honestly. This was a really good one. So for people that are new to this chat, as just like a general information, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through the chat and just look at all the questions that are like up in chat, and just go through them one by one. So if you have any question, anything at all, and yeah, just feel free to chat about it, or like ask questions. So let's have a look here. I'll take a sip of water first though. Let's have a look here. Gotta make sure that I don't miss one. Alyssa, all the way in the beginning of the stream, you asked the question, how do you keep yourself motivated on doing 3D for such a long time? Are we talking about a project, or just like 3D in general? Like being a 3D artist for like 6 years professionally now? Because I mean, it's literally just what I enjoy to do. Like I like creating worlds. I like building environments. I like to imagine, and I like to kind of role play as I'm building stuff. Like, oh, and like if, for example, the medieval scene that I'm working on right now, I just like to imagine myself like living in like the medieval ages, and like going through like a town, and then just going to the market. Like literally, it's super simple. Well, the idea behind it is super simple, of course, right? Like we talked about this a lot of times before. If you're picking up like a really big project, first of all, make sure that it's something that you can tackle, that you have the time for, and that you have the motivation for. That is a thing that is so important to start out with. Because I know when with my schedule, like with the free time that I have for this medieval environment that I'm currently working on, I honestly booked myself a year. It's like, I'm happy if I can finish this in a year. And that's my deadline. And I've been working on it for like a couple of months already. And the thing that is keeping me motivated throughout this time is just surrounding myself with stuff that inspires me. So other people making medieval scenes, that's a big plus. Looking at medieval documentaries, like I watched the documentary series about the castle that they're building in the French countryside, like the castle of Gideon. I watched that a couple of times because that's so valuable for like just tiny stuff that you can't really find in like pictures, right? Like how they would drag up like stones, or if how they would like build like elevators to get like stones up like a certain floor or something, all with wood. There's so much inspiration from that, and I get really pumped when I see that stuff, and I'm just like, oh shit, look at this detail on like this well, like the mechanism, like how much time they put into that mechanism to get it like working, that it like spins up and that you can turn the handle and get like a bucket from the well and get like fresh water. It's stupid when you think about it, but that stuff like really helps me. Yeah, listening to history podcasts about that too. Having like a desktop background, like surrounding myself with like medieval stuff, like that's the stuff that I'm currently really enjoying. And I'll probably do the next thing for the next project that I'm doing was a project that I was working on before. I was taking a lot of inspiration from Deus Ex. So I have like the Deus Ex art books like right behind me. And I would flick through them like at least a couple days a week to just look for like inspiration. And look at like essays of people online breaking down like the Deus Ex timeline or whatever, and like really get into that stuff. And then mixing that with like hydroponics, because I'm really interested myself in hydroponics and like just vertical farming. I had a setup here in the closet too, like something that I built myself. So that is something that just really interested me for like a long time, and like I really just latched onto that, and I'm like, I'm gonna just create like a 3D scene out of this, because I know so much about the inner workings of like different ways of like hydroponics now and how to build those systems, that I was kind of curious how it would go in like an automated way. So yeah, I mean, it's all about keeping yourself motivated for the long run. It's not about seeing like a cool picture on ArtStation and being like, oh, I want to do this, because that's not gonna help. You need to get to the core of it. You need to get to like the underlying stuff that really interests you. And if you, for example, if you look at a scene that is really cool and you're like, oh man, I want to create something like this, it's not enough to then just start building your own scene. It should be, okay, where do they get their inspiration from? Like, where do they get like their art style inspiration from? Like, for example, a lot of the stuff that's been shared on the Beyondextent community is this recent style that that Jasmine is really good in, right? It's like this stylized Ghibli sort of style. And a lot of people are latching onto that. But I also think a lot of people are just latching onto it because it's getting a lot of attention. So you have to be careful there. You have to be careful about why you're getting into stuff. If it's something that really interests you, like at the end of the day, I'm working on my medieval scene, and if it does well or it doesn't, like, I don't really care, because I made it for me. I didn't make it for anyone else, right? I mean, there's a caveat to it, because I'm going to sell it on the marketplace, right? So I do have to keep it in mind just a little bit. But I'm coming at it from a way where if it sells on the marketplace, it's almost like a bonus. Like, I'm not doing it to sell stuff on the marketplace. Because here's the thing, and this applies to all art. If your heart is truly in it, people can tell. People pick up on that. And that's usually the thing that it takes a while to find that and to really find what interests you and what makes you as an artist you, right? It takes time to find your own voice. And you can't really rush it. So, a good question. Thank you so much for the question, Talisa. Let's have a look through the chat here. Good conversations about the indie versus AAA stuff. Oh, I think I missed this one. I want to believe Insomniac set devs aside. That's a direction I'd love to see more often, rather than a dev leaving their studio to go indie, as Supergiants did pretty much. Yeah, but sometimes it might also make sense from like a business perspective, right? Like, say under the Insomniac banner, as a dev, you put in like a bunch of time, and then the majority of the profit is still going through Insomniac. I'm not saying that that is the case, right? I have done zero research into this, but it might be interesting from like a business perspective to make the jump and just start something on your own. Obviously, a bunch of risks attached to that as well, right? You're going to be out there on your own. You don't have the support of a big studio that has like a lot of the workflows and pipelines in place already to help you out as much as possible, right? So there's like a balancing act that's going on there. Jason, hey Timothy, big fan of your podcast. Thank you so much, buddy. I appreciate it. Do you have any tips on how to manage your time and energy? Because I find myself usually spend all my energy and focus stuck in full-time work, and after work I'll just need to spend time with my wife. I'm struggling to find the time to work on anything personal. Look, honestly, Jason, just take that time. If you struggle to find time to work on anything personal, I would say listen to yourself and spend that time with your wife. However, if you want to force yourself to at least do a little bit of art every day, I would do exactly that. It has to be, the reason why I say every day is because it has to be daily. Because then you're building up a habit. And I'm not talking about like multiple hours, right? How I got started all the way in the beginning, and this is something that I've seen other people recommend too, and I have like a bunch of books behind me that talk about the same thing, is building that habit doesn't start with like multiple hours. It can literally be, in our case, if it's 3D environment art, I would probably say half an hour. Just do that, and if after half an hour you're like, I just want to go and watch Netflix with my wife, or whatever you want to do in your personal time, right? Just go do that. But then you already have your half an hour in, and half an hour is not that much. But you'll see, if you keep at it day to day, you're gonna build up this habit where you're gonna get used to that half an hour at some point, and you're gonna be like, maybe today I want to keep working on for longer, and then it might turn into an hour. At a certain point, you might be working like an hour and a half, right? So building that up, it's obviously, there's a lot of factors that come into it, right? There's personal obligations, there's like, I don't know, like other stuff that you want to do with your time. You have to spend time with your family and your wife, and there's all that stuff too. So you have to see where you can slot in your time and where you're the most effective with that time. But I would say that is the biggest thing that I can say. Just try to build up that habit. Let's have a look. Noob at Unreal Engine 4, trying to make my first character today with a free model and animation is horrendous. There's a bunch of good stuff on the Unreal Engine Marketplace that's free as well. And there are even characters that have like full animations and all that stuff too. So that might be a good way to start. Jason, I'm doing great. Recently I felt kind of exhausted. I spent too much time in my full-time 3D environment work. Don't get me wrong, I love my job. And that's why I spend so much time in it. But at the same time, I find it difficult to also spend time with my wife and work on a personal project. I felt like I'm not improving for a year. Well, that's not true, right? It's not true that you're not improving, right? Because even if you're doing stuff like full-time 3D environment artwork, you're still improving. If it's the stuff that you want to be improving at, that might be a different question, but you're still improving at stuff. Because there's obviously this big, how would you say it? Like this big burden or like this big weight on our shoulders as like an environment artist. We need to be up to date constantly, and we need to refresh our skills constantly. But there's also a lot of people that didn't do that, and they might not have all the opportunities that people that do keep up to date do, right? They might not have the same opportunities, but that doesn't mean that you're gonna get fired at some point. Like I know a lot of people that are still working in the industry, just happily doing their stuff and then going home and doing like a bunch of other stuff that's not related to the game industry at all. Thanks to Habik too for the hydrate. Sitting down and doing it is the hardest part. Yep, 100%. 100%. It takes quite a while to build up that habit. I think I've heard some, I have no idea about the science behind this, right? I've heard some numbers thrown out there that it takes like 6 weeks, 3 to 6 weeks to build up like a proper habit. But that's exactly how I started. Like I'm getting to a point where I have to do the opposite. Like I have to stop myself because else I'll just work through the night. But yeah, it's also because I have so many other things that I'm working on, right? So the time that I get to spend on environment art, I'm like, yes, I'm here. Let's do it. I did the opposite of what Tim is talking about. Spend time with the wife. Yeah, exactly. It's important. It's important to find that balance. And you have to be open to changing it too. That's true. That's why I decided to spend time with my wife instead of working on my stuff. Exactly. Because even if you were to do like half an hour a day, right? If you miss that personal work, you can get a lot done in half an hour a day. You just need to turn those projects to make the most use of that time. Obviously, building a full environment is not going to work with half an hour. So I would probably do like a bunch of small tests that at some point when you have more time or when you have built up that habit where, for example, you're spending 2 hours a day. I'm just naming a random number, right? At that point, if you spend all those half an hours like testing stuff and like testing new techniques and like refining the workflow or like doing small tweaks here and there, all those things, all those little bricks, they will come together to form a house. By that point, like if you're comfortable and you build up that habit and you're working more hours now, that's when you can start thinking about using all those smaller chunks into like one project. And it's gonna help you so much. Gonna help you so much. But it's good. I think you're doing a good thing though. I think you're honest to yourself, and you realize that you just don't want to do stuff like after work, and that is totally fine too, right? I just want to throw that out there too. That is totally fine. There is more. As weird as that is coming from me, like there's more to life than 3D environment art. Reminds me, I need to find a hobby. Thank you so much for the advice. No worries, Jason. No worries at all. Hey, Samuel, thanks for popping in, man. I really appreciate it. Have a good one. Yeah, thanks everyone for the good questions today. Let me just go through the chat real quickly and see if I missed any. But I think we should be good. So that means I'm going to be doing the same. I'm going to be popping out too, because I have some other stuff coming up in 20 minutes. So I need to pop out anyway. You missed mine? Oh, wait. Hold on. Hold on. Oh, you're right. Yeah. So, can you talk about what's your average day at work? Or is this something you can't talk about because of your NDA? Good question. Because it changed recently. So different parts of the project require different responsibilities, right? So I'm afraid at this point I can't really go into it that much. However, what I can say is, like, let's rewind the clock. Let's say 6 months ago, my average day at work was largely working on locations. So like set dressing, doing level art basically, and making cool locations. Then also a chunk of it is dedicated to meetings. Obviously the meetings are coming into it as well. Another section is dedicated, this depends on the time of the week, right? It's also management stuff. So like I manage like a really small team at the moment. So just doing one-on-ones and seeing how they're doing. It's not a daily thing, but it's also something that happens on like either weekly or bi-weekly recurrence, depending on how busy it is. Also, outsource management was also part of my responsibilities too. Just either working on assets that could be sent out to them, or giving feedback on assets that come back. That is also part of my responsibilities. Let's have a look. Yeah, just meetings. Exactly. Most of them were fun though, because most of them were relative to the stuff that I was doing in level art. So just talking to the level designers, seeing how we can improve the look and the feel of certain locations. Yeah, but that's pretty much it though. I mean, pretty much it. It's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. I'm just thinking. Yeah, it kind of depends on like, if we're recruiting, I would be involved in recruiting as well. We haven't done that for a while, but I had someone ask me specifics and I told him most professionals can't talk about it. Well, the reason why they can't talk about it is because there might be hints as to the state of the project, or yeah, we just have to be really careful with that, right? Just like the state of the project, like because people might start thinking about like what the timeline is, and oh my god, if they're doing this, then it must mean that the game is not coming out or something like that, right? Like people can make crazy thoughts, and then if it gets picked up by news agencies and all that, then it can turn really bad. But ew, meetings. Yeah, no worries at all, Ben. I'm sorry that I missed the question at first. I was just looking for question marks, and I think I missed that one. All right, everyone. This was an awesome AMA. I loved all the input. Lots of great stuff from everyone here. Lots of input. And yeah, I'll need to do some research on that game that got released under Insomnia. I can see how that worked, if there's any information on it at all. Because I would be interested. I would be interested in that. All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. I'm doing these every Sunday. So if you got any more questions, I'm going to be here every Sunday. Same time, same place. So feel free to drop in, ask questions. And yeah, again, I appreciate you all being here. And I wish you all a nice Sunday. Have a good Sunday, all. See ya.